Imagine a prison break so meticulous and daring that it seemed ripped from the pages of a Hollywood screenplay. But the tragic reality left a trail of heartbreak across the state of Texas. 7 dangerous inmates orchestrated a plan that defied the odds and humiliated the Texas criminal justice system in December of the year 2000. They did not just slip away in the dead of night. They took over a prison maintenance shop and overpowered civilians and guards one by one. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a calculated operation led by a charismatic manipulator who had nothing left to lose. What followed was a nationwide manhunt and a brutal crime that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. How did they manage to breach the walls of a maximum security facility without raising a single alarm until they were long gone? The John B. Connally Unit is a maximum security prison located near Kennedy, Texas, designed to hold the most hardened criminals in the state. Concrete walls and razor wire fences surround the facility, creating an imposing fortress that screams inescapability to anyone who approaches. Inside the prison, the atmosphere is perpetually tense, filled with the sounds of clanging metal doors and the murmurs of inmates serving life sentences. The guards are vigilant, and the protocols are strict, intending to keep the dangerous population contained within the perimeter. However, even the most secure fortress has vulnerabilities if someone is patient enough to find them. In late 2000, the Connally Unit became the stage for the largest prison escape in Texas history. The facility was considered impenetrable, but 7 men were about to prove that security is only as strong as its weakest link. At the center of this audacious plot was George Rivas, a 30-year-old inmate, serving 18 consecutive life sentences for burglary and kidnapping. Rivas was not your typical prisoner. He was intelligent, charming, and possessed a terrifying ability to manipulate those around him. He worked as a clerk in the prison maintenance shop, which gave him access to tools, schedules, and the layout of the facility. Rivas spent months observing the routines of the guards and the civilian supervisors, noting every shift change and lunch break. He identified the gaps in surveillance and began to formulate a strategy that would require precise timing and absolute cooperation. Rivas knew he could not do it alone, so he began to recruit a team of fellow inmates who possessed specific skills and a shared desperation for freedom. Rivas carefully selected 6 other men to join his crew, creating a group that would later be known as the Texas 7. The team included Michael Rodriguez, Joseph Garcia, Jesus Becerta, Patrick Murphy, Donald Newberry, and Larry Harper. Each man brought something different to the table, ranging from muscle to mechanical knowledge, but all were serving long sentences for violent crimes. They held secret meetings in the prison yard or whispered in the chow hall to discuss the details of the plan. Rivas assigned specific roles to each member, ensuring that everyone knew exactly what to do when the time came. The plan relied on a domino effect, where they would overpower supervisors one by one and steal their clothing and identification. Trust was essential, and any hesitation could result in immediate capture or death. The date was set for December 13 in the year 2000, a day chosen because it was near the holidays when staffing might be lighter and routines slightly more relaxed. The morning began like any other, with the inmates reporting to their work assignments in the maintenance shop. The air was cold, and the sky was overcast, providing a gloomy backdrop for the events that were about to unfold. Rivas and his crew moved with a quiet intensity, their nerves hidden beneath the stoic expressions of seasoned convicts. They waited for the designated time when the civilian maintenance supervisor would be alone in his office. This was the first domino that had to fall, and if they failed here, the entire operation would collapse before it even started. Around 11:30 in the morning, Rivas made his move, signaling the others to take their positions. He approached the maintenance supervisor under the guise of discussing a work order, engaging him in conversation to lower his guard. In a split second, the conversation turned into an ambush as the other inmates rushed in to subdue the man. They bound and gagged him, quickly dragging him into a storage room out of sight. The speed and efficiency of the attack were terrifying, proving just how much they had rehearsed this moment. With the supervisor secured, they now had control of the office and the first set of civilian clothes. One of the inmates stripped down and donned the supervisor's uniform, transforming himself from a prisoner into a staff member in a matter of seconds. The plan continued with ruthless precision, as unsuspecting civilian workers and prison guards entered the maintenance shop one by one. As each person walked through the door, they were immediately overpowered by the waiting inmates, who outnumbered them significantly. The captives were bound with duct tape and plastic ties, then moved to the electrical room, which served as a makeshift holding cell. The Texas 7 worked in silence, using hand signals and intense glares to coordinate their actions. They took radios, keys, and identification cards from their hostages, stripping them of their authority and their means of communication. Fear filled the eyes of the captives as they realized the gravity of the situation, but the inmates assured them that no one would be hurt if they cooperated. By the early afternoon, the group had taken more than 10 hostages, including maintenance workers and correctional officers. The pile of stolen uniforms grew, and soon several members of the Texas 7 were dressed as civilians or guards. This disguise was crucial for the next phase of the escape, which involved moving through the prison grounds without drawing fire from the guard towers. Rivas maintained a calm demeanor, directing his team like a military commander in the field. He monitored the radio frequencies, listening for any sign that the alarm had been raised elsewhere in the prison. So far, their luck was holding, and the rest of the facility remained oblivious to the hostile takeover happening in the maintenance sector. The most dangerous part of the plan involved tricking the guards in the watchtowers, who had orders to shoot any inmate attempting to escape. Rivas called the tower from the maintenance office, claiming that they needed to move a truck to transport materials. He used the terminology and tone of a supervisor, knowing that any hesitation in his voice could raise suspicion. The guard in the tower authorized the movement, assuming it was a routine maintenance task. This deception was the key to opening the back gate, a heavy steel barrier that stood between the inmates and their freedom. With the gate authorization confirmed, the group loaded into a prison maintenance truck, concealing themselves under tools and supplies. 3 of the inmates dressed in civilian clothes sat in the front of the truck, while the others hid in the back. They drove slowly toward the back gate, waving casually to the guards in the towers, as if it were just another day on the job. The tension inside the truck was suffocating as they approached the final checkpoint. Every second felt like an hour as they waited for the heavy gate to slide open. If the guard looked too closely or noticed a face that did not belong, the tower guards would open fire with high-powered rifles. But the disguise worked, and the gate rolled back, allowing the white truck to pass through the perimeter fence and onto the open road. Once they were clear of the prison grounds, they accelerated down the highway, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Connally Unit. They knew it would be some time before the hostages were discovered, and the alarm was sounded, giving them a precious head start. They drove to a nearby retail store where a getaway vehicle had been stashed by a relative of one of the inmates. They abandoned the prison truck and piled into the new vehicle, shedding the last physical connection to their incarceration. The adrenaline of the escape began to fade, replaced by the cold reality of being fugitives in a state that executes cop killers and escapees. They were free, but they had no money, no food, and 7 faces that would soon be on every television screen in America. Back at the prison, the alarm was finally raised when one of the hostages managed to free himself and call for help. The facility went into immediate lockdown, with sirens wailing and guards scrambling to secure the perimeter. The count confirmed the worst fear of the warden's 7 dangerous inmates were missing. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice initiated a massive manhunt, coordinating with local police and state troopers to set up roadblocks. Helicopters took to the sky, scanning the brush and highways for any sign of the fugitives. The news broke, quickly interrupting afternoon broadcasts to warn the public about the escape. The 7 men were considered armed and extremely dangerous, and citizens were urged to lock their doors. The Texas 7 knew they needed resources to survive on the run, as they could not use credit cards or contact friends without being traced. They made their way to the Houston area and then north toward the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex, moving constantly to avoid detection. They stayed in cheap motels, using cash they had scraped together or stolen along the way. Rivas enforced strict discipline within the group, forbidding drug use and reckless behavior that could draw attention. They blended in with the holiday crowds, relying on the fact that people are often too busy with their own lives to notice the faces of strangers. However, their funds were running low, and desperation began to set in. Rivas decided that they needed a large sum of money and weapons to protect themselves and continue their flight. He set his sights on an Oshman's sporting goods store in Irving, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. The store sold guns and outdoor equipment, making it a one-stop shop for everything they needed. They spent days casing the location, watching the employees, and noting the closing procedures. They planned to strike on Christmas Eve, when the store would be busy with last-minute shoppers, and the staff would be eager to go home. It was a high-risk gamble, but the potential reward was enough to sustain them for months if they pulled it off. On the evening of December 24, the Texas 7 put their plan into motion, entering the Oshman store just before closing time. They posed as customers browsing the aisles until the last legitimate shopper had left the building. As the employees began to lock the doors, the inmates drew their weapons and announced the robbery. They herded the staff into the back of the store, binding them just as they had done with the prison workers. The efficiency of their movements showed that their time on the run had not dulled their coordination. They began looting the store, grabbing semi-automatic rifles, ammunition, winter clothing, and over $70,000 in cash and checks. The robbery seemed to be going perfectly until a woman standing outside the store noticed the commotion inside. She called 911, reporting a possible robbery in progress at the sporting goods store. The dispatch went out to local units, and Officer Aubrey Hawkins of the Irving Police Department was the first to respond. Officer Hawkins was a 29-year-old husband and father who had just finished a Christmas dinner with his family before starting his shift. He pulled his patrol car up to the back of the store, unaware that he was driving into an ambush laid by 7 desperate men who had vowed never to return to prison. As Officer Hawkins drove into the loading dock area, the Texas 7 were in the process of loading their stolen goods into an SUV. They spotted the police car and immediately opened fire from the shadows. The inmates were armed with the powerful weapons they had just stolen, and they unleashed a hail of bullets upon the patrol car. Officer Hawkins did not stand a chance, as his vehicle was riddled with gunfire before he could even exit or draw his weapon. He was struck 11 times and died at the scene, a tragic victim of the group's ruthless determination. The inmates piled into their vehicle and sped away, leaving behind a shattered family and a police force demanding justice. The murder of Officer Hawkins escalated the situation from a prison break to a capital murder investigation of the highest priority. The entire state of Texas was outraged, and the reward for information leading to their capture skyrocketed to $500,000. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the manhunt, placing the Texas 7 on their 10 most wanted list. Every law enforcement agency in the country was on alert, and photos of the 7 men were plastered on billboards and newspapers nationwide. The group had crossed a line that ensured they would face the death penalty if caught, but for now they had vanished into the night once again. Realizing that Texas was too hot, the group decided to flee north to Colorado, where they could hide in the winter tourist crowds. They purchased a used recreational vehicle and drove through the Panhandle, crossing state lines under the cover of darkness. They arrived in Woodland Park, Colorado, a small town near Colorado Springs, nestled in the Rocky Mountains. They posed as a group of religious missionaries, calling themselves traveling Christians, to explain their group dynamic and lack of female companions. They rented a space at an RV park and tried to blend in with the local community, attending church services and being polite neighbors. For several weeks, the Texas 7 lived quietly in the RV park, hiding in plain sight, while the manhunt raged across the country. They grew beards and wore winter gear, which helped conceal their identities from casual observers. George Rivas continued to lead the group, maintaining their cover story and managing their stolen funds. They spent their days listening to police scanners and watching the news, terrified that a single slip-up would lead the authorities to their door. The snowy landscape of Colorado was a stark contrast to the prison cells of Texas, offering a false sense of peace and freedom. But the pressure of living a lie was mounting, and paranoia began to fracture the group unity. The breakthrough in the case came from an unlikely source: the television show America's Most Wanted. The program aired a segment detailing the escape and the murder of Officer Hawkins, urging viewers to look closely at the faces of the fugitives. A resident of the RV park in Woodland Park was watching the show and recognized the men living in the motorhome next door. The neighbor realized that the polite religious group matched the descriptions of the violent criminals on the screen. He called the local police, who contacted the FBI and the Texas Rangers. The tip was the break that law enforcement had been waiting for, and a tactical team was quickly assembled. On January 21, in the year 2001, a massive task force descended on the RV park in Woodland Park. SWAT teams surrounded the motorhome and the surrounding area, armed with automatic weapons and armored vehicles. They called out to the occupants, ordering them to surrender peacefully or face deadly force. The tension was palpable as the officers waited for a response, knowing these men had already killed a police officer. George Rivas, Joseph Garcia, and Michael Rodriguez surrendered without a fight, realizing they were completely outgunned. However, 4 members of the group were not in the RV at the time, and a frantic search began for the remaining fugitives. 2 more members were captured nearby in a Jeep, but Larry Harper and Patrick Murphy had holed up in a separate recreational vehicle. The authorities located them and surrounded the vehicle, initiating a standoff that lasted for hours. Negotiators tried to talk the men out, but Larry Harper told his father over the phone that he would not go back to prison. As the police prepared to breach the vehicle, a single gunshot rang out from inside. Larry Harper had taken his own life, choosing death over a return to incarceration. Patrick Murphy surrendered shortly after leaving 6 of the original 7 alive to face the consequences of their actions. The captured members of the Texas 7 were extradited back to Texas under heavy security, wearing bulletproof vests and shackles. The public anger was intense, and crowds gathered to jeer at the men who had killed a police officer on Christmas Eve. They were held in solitary confinement, separated from the general prison population, to prevent any further escape attempts or communication. The legal process began swiftly, with prosecutors seeking the death penalty for all 6 surviving members under the Texas law of parties. This law states that anyone involved in a crime that results in murder is equally responsible regardless of who pulled the trigger. The trials were emotional and highly publicized, featuring testimony from the hostages at the Connally Unit and the family of Officer Hawkins. The defense teams tried to argue mitigating circumstances, citing the harsh conditions of the prison system and the leadership of Rivas. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and the brutality of the murder left little room for sympathy. One by one, each of the 6 men was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. The judge and jury sent a clear message that the killing of a law enforcement officer would be met with the ultimate punishment. The courtroom was silent as the sentences were read, sealing the fate of the Texas 7. George Rivas, the mastermind behind the escape, was the first to be executed by lethal injection in February of 2012. In his final statement, he apologized to the Hawkins family, expressing regret for the pain he had caused. Over the following years, other members of the group were also executed as their appeals ran out. Each execution brought the story back into the headlines, reminding the public of the fear and tragedy that had gripped the state years earlier. The legal battles were long and complex, but the outcome remained unchanged for the men who had sought freedom at the cost of a human life. The escape of the Texas 7 had a profound impact on the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, leading to sweeping reforms in prison security. The Connally Unit underwent significant changes in procedure, adding more surveillance cameras and tightening the protocols for maintenance workers. The trust that had allowed Rivas to manipulate the system was replaced by rigid scrutiny and double checks. The escape served as a wake-up call for prisons across the nation, highlighting the dangers of complacency and the ingenuity of desperate inmates. It became a case study in criminal justice academies, taught as a lesson in what can go wrong when security measures fail. The legacy of the Texas 7 is a grim reminder of the capacity for violence that exists within the prison system. It is a story of wasted potential and destructive choices, where intelligence and planning were used for evil rather than good. For the family of Officer Aubrey Hawkins, the pain of his loss remains a constant presence, a void that no execution can fill. Every Christmas Eve is a reminder of the night their husband and father was taken from them in a senseless act of greed. The memory of the Texas 7 persists not as a tale of glorious rebellion, but as a cautionary tragedy of crime and punishment. As we look back on this case, it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of incarceration and the desperation it breeds. While the actions of the Texas 7 were inexcusable, the flaws in the system that allowed them to escape cannot be ignored. The story serves as a testament to the bravery of law enforcement officers who risk their lives every day to protect the public. It also stands as a dark chapter in the history of Texas, proving that the line between order and chaos is often thinner than we think. The well-planned escape was indeed short-lived, but the scars it left behind will last forever. In the end, the Texas 7 achieved their goal of freedom for only 40 days before their world came crashing down. They traded life in prison for a brief taste of liberty and a death sentence, leaving a trail of victims in their wake. The audacity of their plan captures the imagination, but the reality of their crimes grounds us in the sorrow of the aftermath. As the sun sets over the walls of the Connally Unit, the ghosts of that December day still linger in the cold wind. Justice was served, but the cost was undeniably high, reminding us all that actions have consequences that echo through time.